ora koutou katoa. Welcome to Raw Politics Election Anniversary Special. What an episode we have in store for you today. I am political editor Laura Walters, and joining me in Wellington is senior political reporter Marc Daalder. Hey Marc.
Hello.
And joining us as always from Auckland is Newsroom co-editor Tim Murphy. Hey Tim.
Kia ora both.
Now, before we get stuck into a big wrap-up of the year and a cast forward to the 2026 election, I thought it would be a good idea to do a bit of a vibe check. We've just recently seen the mood of the boardroom survey results come out. I thought we could do a bit of a mood of our newsroom check. How are we feeling? How have things changed for you too between the election and now?
I'm feeling fantastic, I have to say. I have received a tax cut.
Yes.
Inflation has come down. Interest rates have come down. Nicola Willis personally did this. I am spending all this extra money on my commute in and out of the office because, again, as we've covered, the police are making me go to work. But other than that, you know, what a wonderful world we live in compared to the totalitarian hellscape that we lived in a year ago today.
Yes. Huge changes. Thank you so much to the coalition government. I must say that I'm not sure whether I'm getting older and just more tired, or whether the pace has actually ramped up a lot. I feel like each new government, I say, they're doing more things, they're doing them more quickly. How will we ever keep up with this? And I've just felt this increasingly this past year, and especially over the past 6 months. But I don't think we're going to get a break, so we're just going to have to dig in and deal with it, I think. Tim, how about you? How are you feeling?
I'm feeling like I'm in recovery a bit from this government's first year. It's been a thunderous cascade of change and reform. And I think, Laura, you're not, but I am getting older and tireder. And I really think that this year of change has been one of the most significant pace and momentum of change of the time that I can remember. You know, so many things on so many levels being reformed, debunked, rejected, repealed, and some other things launched, some positive things, but there's been a lot going on, and I think most people who observe these things are probably looking forward to a bit of a breather.
Yeah, and it's all happening at pace as well, isn't it? And that makes me feel better, Tim. Less old and less tired, thank you.
When I need to relax from the pace, I find lighting up a cigarette is the best way to do it. Easier, cheaper than ever. But Parliament evacuated this past week for a fire drill. Anecdotally, perhaps Casey Costello smoking in the office. So remember to do that outside if you're gonna be partaking.
Now, with that in mind, we are going to kick into the episode. Today on Raw Politics, where we wrap up the past year since the election, we'll be taking a look at the highs and lows for both the coalition and the opposition. We'll also be analysing the potential risks and opportunities for each side ahead of the 2026 election. And we will sort the wheat from the chaff in the 54th Parliament. And to wrap up, as always, we will offer you some recommendations. What a difference a year makes. 365 and a quarter days almost since the last election. There have been highs, there have been lows, there have been weird and wonderful moments. And our fantastic producer Trent has put together this wonderful audio mashup for us. Let's have a listen to the weird bits, the wonderful bits, and the most memorable quotes of the past year.
That on the numbers tonight, National will be in a position to lead the next government.
Earlier this evening, I called Christopher Luxon to congratulate him on National's results. As it stands, Labor is not in a position to form another government.
Why haven't you replied to David Seymour's text?
Well, for the most obvious reasons. I had so many Looney Tune texts. You might not believe this, but I do. And I can show you if you want to see them.
Again, not getting into conversations that we're having in the room. Again, I'm not getting into any of those details. Again, not getting into any of that.
Neither is Mr. Peters.
No. I, Winston Raymond Peters, swear that I will be faithful
and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles III, his heirs and successors, according to law, so help me God.
Golri's Gutterman silent as she finally faces court.
And if there is a mineral, if there is a mining opportunity, and it's impeded by a blind frog, goodbye freedom.
For the first time in 14 years, hard-working New Zealanders will get to keep more of their own money through our government's tax relief.
You don't need an abacus to figure out that this is a government borrowing to pay for tax cuts.
I intend to resign on Saturday the 10th of March this year.
Leaving his spot for Swarbrick's taking.
I want New Zealanders to take back their power and their control.
Marama Davidson received the diagnosis so many of us hope to never receive.
A routine mammogram showed some potential concerns. A biopsy then confirmed I have breast cancer.
I've been silenced. I've been isolated.
Sure, feelings are one thing, but again, the facts are another.
Thousands of incredibly brave survivors, many who have made the journey here today to Parliament, have told their stories that are now permanently etched on the pages of history. And the record in those pages is a dark stain on New Zealand's past.
Can you please explain how sushi is woke?
Oh, look, if you don't get that sushi's woke, I don't know how to wake you up.
Will Labor campaign on broadening the tax system?
I think I can say yes to that question. Exactly what that looks like, we've still got a lot of water to flow under the bridge.
But I want to be clear today that the National Party will not support the Treaty Principles Bill beyond first reading. And, let's be clear, I'm wealthy, I'm, sorted. As I've said, look, the bottom line is, I just say to you,
I'm just getting really, really clear.
as I said to you,
Well, as I said,
but I just say to you,
We will get this country back on track. Thank you, everyone, and good night.
We've just heard the Prime Minister say one of his favourite lines, we are getting New Zealand back on track. Tim, what do you reckon? Has he done it?
Well, we've probably gone back a little bit. Whether we're on track, we're kind of like, and this is with apologies to train spotters out there, we're sort of like a carriage and an engine stuck in a sidling yard with one of those switch things that take the train from one track to the other, and Luxon and co are sort of working away at that, and we're waiting. Yes, we're going to be on another track soon. This year's been very much that kind of attempt to shift things, attempt to get where they think the country should be going economically, especially. So I'm not sure we're there yet. You were very happy before with, Mark, was very happy before with his interest rates and inflation down and his little tax cut and things. So yeah, I mean, some people may well feel that the track is kind of in view now, but I don't think he's got us demonstrably into a new path.
So maybe a rerouting or a change of track rather than
an attempt.
Huge success.
An attempt to reroute, as you'd say, with one of those big metal things they pull on to move the track one side to the other.
A lever.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like you've ever worked in a train yard before, Tim. But we get the analogy. Mark, what do you reckon? What highs has the coalition experienced in this past year since the election?
I think you'd have to say that the tax cuts really are the top one, right? Because it was National's campaign promise. They spent months and months kind of refusing to say whether this would really happen or not, and kind of playing footsie with everyone. And then lo and behold, they did what they said they were going to do.
That's a horrible image. Sorry, I just want to just pause there.
Roads, I've written down roads, but the government policy statement on transport, the return of the roads of national significance. Simeon Brown has been, deep in the transport portfolio, rejigging the money from the cycleways to the roads and from the trains to the roads and from the buses to the roads. From the potholes to the potholes
on the roads.
So maybe getting New Zealand back on the road is the more effective slogan for next year. The fast track bill, a bit of both, right? On the one hand, clearly something more of a liability than they may have expected going into the process, but having that fast track list released over the weekend and seeing that the companies don't feel like applying for it will jeopardize their social license. Companies, renewable energy developers, big companies, Sanford in the fishing industry, mining companies, sure, that's less of an issue, but property developers, everyone came to this fast track process and said, hey, look, we know it's a little bit politically poisonous, but not so bad that we won't take advantage of it. Mm-hmm. And then on the law and order front, they've passed a huge raft of legislation. The question now is what effect does that have? And that's always something that you have to wait quite a while to see.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? We've got such short political terms in New Zealand. A lot of these big changes we won't see the effects of, whether they are successful or unsuccessful for a long time. And I just, I was thinking about the coalition's lows for this past year. And one of the things I wrote down was around the fast track, what you mentioned there, Marc. I mean, this government, as we discussed at the beginning of this episode, has done things at pace. And in order to do so, they have run roughshod, essentially, over normal processes, constitutional norms. And that has been something that they have been criticised for, rightly, a lot by the media and by others, by lawyers and constitutional experts. And while I think that we might see that as a low or something that's a negative, I do feel like for this government, they see that as success. They see it, that as moving their agenda forward of getting things done. The fast track is one of the most obvious examples of that. So it's really hard when we're talking about highs and lows, what we might see or others might see as a potential low, that the coalition government has actually managed to convince themselves as a high or a big success. I mean, do you have anything to add on to the highs, Tim?
Highs and lows. The highs, for me, I gave it a lot of thought. What would be the high point for this coalition government? And it came back to me to be the actual formation of their coalition agreements. That they had achieved it's sort of like Trump achieved with his Supreme Court nominees. They've managed to get a grouping together that has changed and pushed back against what they see as this kind of generalized, woke, environmental, non-development, non-economic progress thinking in government and kindness and all those sort of things. So they managed to get that together and they've made their statement. They've got the ground. Low points for this government, I think the low points are clearly on health. The very low point, I think, was when they failed to come through with that promise on the funding of cancer drugs in the budget. They now argue that was just a delay. It was just, a matter of timing and everything else, but it wasn't at the time. It hadn't been prioritised properly. It had been overpromised. And then with all the pushback, they advanced on it and they've got where they want to be. But it was a very low point politically to come out in a budget and stiff the people who are suffering from cancer. Another low point would be on some of the race policies. And low, I don't mean that they're wrong. I just mean that that's a point where they are getting a lot of blowback and divisiveness in response. So those are the two areas I think that they've probably, gone less successfully on.
I've noted those things as well, Tim, the continuing issues in the health portfolio, the treaty principles bill tension, and what came out of that as well around the attacks on the ACT Minister Karen Chor as well. We discussed this on Raw Politics, the fact that she was found crying in the hallways of Parliament. You've got to see that as a low, for a coalition minister to be found in that space. Of course, we had National Party MP David McLeod with the issues around his donation declarations. We've had Winston Peters essentially denying man-made climate change. There are a lot of things there. We've had Casey Costello, as Marc referred to earlier in the episode, and the policies around smoking cessation and vaping.
The mysteriously appearing documents on her desk that she then forwards to officials and says, let's do this policy.
So there are lots of things here. There are lots of scandals. There are lots of low points politically, but nothing so far that has, led to a downfall of, a politician. We had Melissa Lee and Penny Simmons booted from their portfolios early. Luxon dealt with it. They were gone. Everything was back to normal. So lots of things there that could have been really bad politically, but they've seemed to kind of move through a lot of them. I agree. I think health and race are two things to keep an eye on in the lead up to 2026.
I think the accommodation supplement bit as well, not a policy issue, and I think we'll touch on that later potentially, but, that was a difficult moment for Luxon and one of the few cases where he has himself personally backed down on an issue.
So we've done a bit of a look back now for the coalition's past year. Let's cast forwards a little bit. Tim, what do you think is the biggest risk for the coalition in these next 2 years in the lead up to the 2026 election?
Probably that the areas of government that they have identified as having been broken won't come right. So their changes to Kāinga Ora won't pay off. that their changes to the ferry project won't save any money, that their changes to all sorts of other areas where they've just said, we've looked at this, the health sector, the deficit there, the billion or whatever number you want to throw at it, that they say health is in deficit, that actually none of those things come right in a way for them now that they've made them such an issue. They've said this is broken and hopeless. They need it to come right within 2 years or to show progress, and it might not.
And Marc, the flip side of that, I mean, what would you think are the biggest opportunities for the coalition, if they can land them, if they can get them right between now and 2026?
Yeah, I think it's almost the inverse of what Tim said. They talked about it as a fix-up job coming into government, and if they can fix it up, we actually didn't get a strong sense of what you do with a fixed country, right? And so that's if we go into the 2026 election and everyone's happy with the state of the health system, everyone thinks our kids are getting smarter to the degree that they should be, those basic services are being met, the government is in or soon will be in surplus, then it's the opportunity for the government to sketch out, well, what's our vision of New Zealand going forward? And also that's probably potentially also where cracks start to show between the coalition parties because, it's not clear to the degree to which the government was elected on the basis of each of them presenting their vision for New Zealand or on the basis of they'll be able to manage the current sort of situation better than Labour could. And, when you finish the managing, what happens next?
So they agreed on what they disliked, but what is their vision going forward once they are on that road?
And even how to fix some of what they disliked. But then what's a better New Zealand look like? I think that Winston Peters will give you a very different answer from David Seymour, from Christopher Luxon.
And Laura, in terms of opportunity, I think when Luxon and Seymour and Peters sit round and have a Diet Coke, whatever it is that Seymour drinks, probably a wine cooler or something.
Nothing too woke.
And a heavy whiskey. When they're sitting around saying, okay, after a year, how have we gone? They'd say, look, it was a bit fraught. We had to do a whole lot of things. A whole lot of the normal, predictable squeaky wheels have been squeaking like hell. But we've done some of the things we sort of promised our people would do. Our people, would do the anti-woke, anti-Māori, all those things. But I think they'd also say, and they're probably right, okay, we've got that bad stuff under sort of control, or at least out in the wild. Now we've got 2 years of a turning economy, and of an economy that, whether down to Nicola or whether just cyclical and a bit of Nicola, or whether Grant, if he continued now, if he was the Treasury Minister, whether that might be the same. They will get the benefit of reducing debt. The deficit will be held so long as their spend can be held. Inflation, interest rates will be lower. Generally, things should be better for them. The housing market should be better. All these things that in 2 years' time, they should look forward with confidence to politically and electorally, things could get a lot smoother. And they're not negative now. They're still in the polls, despite this year, held up to where they were a year ago. And so they could form a coalition again if it was right now. So I think they'll be benefiting from the turn of the economic cycle, at least. And they should feel some confidence out of that.
That is a nice positive note to leave that on there, Tim. Thank you both. Now we're going to turn our attention to the opposition parties. Again, we will have a look back at the highs and the lows before looking forwards to the 2026 election.
I just want to say 2026 election. It's possible we get a 2025 election. I think we'll discuss that later as well. But the next election.
You think that the coalition is going to fall apart, crash and burn. I love it.
I'm not saying it will, but it could, right?
Takes.
It's just don't schedule vacations next year. It says the guy who scheduled a vacation for next year.
Yes. All right. You may have to stay in the country if we are covering another election. We cannot do it without you, Marc. That's a bit of a low note, but I was going to ask you about some highs. Let's start with the biggest opposition party, Labour. I'm not trying to be facetious here, but it is quite hard to think of the highs for the Labour Party. For this past year, they have gone under the radar, as we have discussed, as others have discussed, especially in recent months. What would you say have been Labour's highs?
It's a good question. The media bill, almost, right? Because that's been picked up by the government after government parties were very, very critical of it. And that's an interesting kind of policy win for them. I don't know that that's a political win in that I think it's a little bit too niche and technical of an issue for most people to care. I think Labour has been vocal on the public service cuts, and I think I'll be talking about Aisha a little bit later, but I don't know that that's had the kind of cut through that they would have wanted it to. Again, they've had particular individuals stand out at different times. They have been at the front of the kind of prosecuting Casey Costello and Nicole McKee on guns and Karen Chor on Oranga Tamariki. So some of that has come through, but it doesn't. That's the kind of the battles. There's no winning of the war at the moment, I don't think, for Labour.
What about the broader opposition? We've obviously also got the Greens and Te Pāti Māori. Have they had some big wins, some highs this year?
It's hard for the Greens, everything has been just so bad that it's hard to pick out moments where they have done things. Te Anō Tuiona's members' bill has been picked up on citizenship for people from Samoa. Kind of a win, but again, that's not the headlines that you think of. If you look at the Green Party headlines for the past year, very few of them are going to be positive. For Te Pāti Māori, just doesn't engage with media a whole lot or anyone outside of their constituency, which is maybe a fine strategy for a political party, and we've discussed that in the past. But again, you don't look at them and go, wow, they've done an outstanding job over the last year.
I mean, Mark's touched on it, Tim, but it's easy to think of the lows more than the highs, isn't it? I mean, with the Greens, you think about Golriz Garaman, we think of Darling Tana, we think of Julianne Genter. They've also had some personal tragedies within the party. It feels like a lot of lows for the Greens, and then we've got Te Pāti Māori's census data allegations and questions. That's still all up in the air. A lot of lows. Are there standouts among those lows for you? And do you think these have lasting effects in heading into the 2026 election?
2026 or 2025, as Mark has mused. Look, I think Kahu Kata for the Greens has actually been a leader in the inquisition of Karen Chor in the House. And I'm certainly not saying she has sort of bullied her or put her into crying, because she's done it very politely and gently, but she's been effective, I think, on that subject. And one or two of the others have been good as well. They're missing both their former leaders that they went into this year with, for one reason or the other, as we know. Chloe's kind of been pushed sideways to try and find her feet, I think, yet, with leading. Te Pāti Māori, I think, while, yes, there are issues there in the party organisation, in terms of their caucus, they've been strident. They've been very strong in pushing back against some of the things that they would see as the government's anti-Māori agenda. They've shown that repeatedly, and quite a few of their number have stood up and been prominent in doing that. It's not just the leaders. So I think both parties have shown talent coming through at pushing back. And it is year one of 3 or 2.5. And, they have time, and they'll be hoping for a summer where they can recalibrate, come back and get back on the front foot for their part of the electorate, yeah.
And I would say, when I'm thinking about looking forwards, you're talking about after this summer. Gosh, I think we're all looking forward to summer. But beyond that, I feel like the biggest risk and the biggest opportunity for both the Greens and Te Pāti Māori are kind of intertwined when I think about it, that they've both put such a big focus on their grassroots activism, on mobilising their communities outside of this place, not just talking to the press gallery, not just hanging out in the Beltway, not putting all of their resources into Parliament, into debates in the House. I'm not saying they're not doing that at all, but that's not where their focus has been. It's been out of it. It's been mobilising communities, getting people on board, encouraging them to submit, to protest, to hikoi, all of those things. And I think that's really inspiring for populations. Those are the types of things that get people to show up to the polls, come the next election, whether it's in 2025 or 2026. But I think the risk of that is if they are not also focusing on what happens in Parliament, the business of Parliament, if they're not also professionalising their parties and putting enough focus on that, then they risk having more of these gaffes or scandals or things like that happening. It takes too much of the party resource. It takes up all of the oxygen in the media, and then the good stuff that they're doing doesn't get the same focus. So I think balancing that is going to be a big one for both of those smaller parties in the coming couple of years. Politics is mostly a serious business, but sometimes politicians throw caution to the wind and put their reckons and their mugs on social media. It was revealed earlier this year that Christopher Luxon has 7 social media people in his team, and it shows. They have been going hard on Instagram and TikTok especially, as have the opposition parties. Thankfully, New Zealand First Senior MP Shane Jones has stopped his TikTok sing-alongs. But before we kick off this next section, let's take a listen to the spicy track that Trent has edited together for us.
Hey, what do you do for a living?
Sorry?
What do you do for a living?
I'm Prime Minister of New Zealand.
Oh, do you have a cool office?
Actually, that's it up there. On that 9th floor.
Oh.
Come on, I'll come and show you. More cops on the beat. Bet. More cops on the beat. Bet. Quiet.
I expect that will be within the quarter. You'll hear a decision this year.
We're going to move into a little bit more of a quick fire section of this election anniversary special. We've all read the yearbook superlatives, as I recently found out that they were called, most likely to become the President of the United States, best hair, most likely to be late for class, dog ate the homework, that kind of thing. We're going to do the same for our politicians. Tim, let's start with you. Who is most likely to become PM in the next couple of years? And you can't say Christopher Luxon.
Well, I'd say Nicola Willis, only because neither of the other coalition parties would get there, obviously. And she had a year where she must feel pretty satisfied. She's got to grips with that big, ugly budget, that portfolio, and I think she's performed pretty bloody well. She tends to a bit of condescension in the House that might not come over that well generally in the electorate, but that's probably from being the smartest person in that zone of her side of the House, probably. But I think she's would be well placed if a change was needed.
Safe pair of hands. Mark, let's do kind of the opposite of that, or the flip of that. Who's most likely to get the boot?
I think it should be Casey Costello, in that the array of things that have happened since she became a minister in her office, with the mysteriously appearing documents, with the changes to smoke-free, with not telling cabinet about independent advice or official advice, for example, saying that there would be a $42 billion cost from the smoke-free reforms and social costs, plus the separate but still biggish issue of the police numbers, recruiting new police, this goal in the coalition agreement that seems to have a different definition depending on the day and the weather, and whether Mercury is in retrograde, all of that sort of stuff. Any other minister would be sacked, but because she's not a National Party minister, Christopher Luxon doesn't feel he can do it, and so she'll persist up until there's some form of reckoning, or she'll just keep persisting. So other than Casey Costello, most likely to get the boot, we went through all the National Party ministers. All of them seem to be doing enough. Melissa Lee is now in a position where, given her portfolios, it's hard to imagine her messing up badly enough in anything to get the boot. So I've picked Damien O'Connor after a discussion last week, not just about that issue, but also a veteran politician who probably is going to keep speaking his mind regardless of what his leader tells him to do. And if he gets kicked out, whoops anyways. I don't think he's all that wedded to staying around, and that just makes him, a bit of a political liability.
Well, I'm going to answer the question of which MP is most likely to be running late. You might remember that Louise Upston actually missed out on getting into the House in time to vote through her bill. So we have to say Louise Upston on that one. It's an obvious answer. But I would like to put in an honourable mention to Chris Hipkins. Poor Chris Hipkins. I feel like he's really copping it this episode. But I have had a couple of times when I've been due for meetings or interviews in his office, and he's been out taking a stroll and has been running a bit late. So honourable mention for him on that one. Tim, we'll come back to you next. Who is most likely to bring down the coalition?
Well, there's no contest on that. It's going to be Winston Peters. I don't think he will. I don't think this coalition actually will fracture. But in every other time he's been in government, he's either left, been moved, not been part of the government at the time, or not been a with the program like he was at the end of 2017-20 with Jacinda Ardern, where he was actively for months beforehand mocking and attacking her, Labor, everybody about policies. So I think, he's certainly the case. I don't think Seymour would do it. They are getting a lot of what they want right now, and if they can hang in, they'll have to differentiate to keep their 8% and maybe even go up. But I don't think he'll split it.
I just want to, this is kind of stepping outside the format that I've put in place for us here, but I just wanted to pick up on what you said there, Tim, about Seymour and how he's done really well, I think, to play at that table with the big boys, essentially, with Luxon and Peters. He's been getting, like you say, a lot of what he wants. He's been also able to still continue to do the ACT Party leader thing and not get pulled back into line or slapped down. So I think that he's been having a pretty good term so far. Mark, most likely to become an unlikely social media star. Who have you got for us?
I've got Phil Twyford, because you can imagine a scenario where he's saying something perfectly genuine, someone records it, it goes viral on TikTok, and then suddenly it's like everyone, all the young people are like, Phil Twyford, we love Phil Twyford. He gets in on it, he does a couple memes, immediately it dies, it's gone. Like as soon as he acknowledges that he's gone viral, it's over. But he'll have his 2 minutes of fame, and hey, maybe a bid for the Labour Party leadership in that time could just turn out to be successful.
He would be an outside choice. Let's see if he's listening to this. Let's keep a close eye on his social media. Yeah. And to wrap up this section, I would like to ask us all, I guess, our MVP, our most valuable person, player, however you want to put the P. Politician. Most valuable politician. That's the obvious one. Thanks, Mark. For me, I will go first. It's got to be Erica Stanford, and I think she'll be surprised to hear me say this as an education reporter who's often scrutinising announcements, picking holes in it. That's the job. But in saying that, she has been very effective. She does engage across the spectrum with all sorts of people in her portfolio. She also did an outstanding job when the abuse and care inquiry report was delivered to Parliament. She was incredibly empathetic. She's continued to engage with survivors. So, and nothing seemed to touch her. No scandals so far. She's done well at balancing that ACT education wants and the national education wants or beliefs or values systems. Unsurprising. Other people have said her name before, but she's my MVP. Tim, what have you got for us?
My MVP, and by making him MVP, it's not a show of approval. It's a bit like on Twitter when you say retweets and likes and not endorsements. So, however, having said that, with some admiration for the scale of his workload and for the momentum and for the big ticket items that Chris Bishop has taken on and advanced, huge policy areas, RMA, development, and in infrastructure and so on, he would be my MVP and sort of most vital performance for National. And, above it all, he just doesn't give a fug.
I'm glad that you're picking up on that one from last week, Tim. Good on you. All right, Mark, who have you got for us?
I've got Aisha Verrill. I think she, of all the Labour MPs, has been the most consistent in getting media appearances and landing hits on the government. The public service portfolio, she's been the voice of all those laid off public servants and Wellington issues as well, which is a new role for her. As health, also a doctor, foils very nicely with Shane Retty, also a doctor, and they can go back and forth, and a former health minister herself, so she's very much across the detail. And she's been the face of the kind of government's prosecution of Casey Costello over the smoke-free changes. And that's a story which has been, a scandal for the government, but which Labour has been intimately involved with and very much pushing along. And she's been the person doing that. So I think from the opposition perspective, she's probably the most effective politician, maybe MEP. I think that has a different meaning.
And just to wrap up this section, do either of you have an LVP, a least valuable politician that's coming to you, or you think everyone's doing a pretty good job?
Well, to her party, Darlene Tana is clearly an LVP. In other parties, well, Melissa Lee was certainly an LVP for National, and Mark's going to say it, but I'll have to mirror it. Casey Costello is probably LVP of the sitting of the House. Yeah.
Mm.
I want to say maybe Chris Hipkins and/or Carmel Cipollone. Just neither of them have managed to fire in the past year. And when Chippy is gone, like he was for the past few weeks, Carmel has not been able to kind of rise up to the role either.
MAP.
What's MAP?
Most absent politician.
Yeah, most absent politician, and the Celebrity Treasure Island thing. It's just neither of them have done anything especially egregious, but nor have they managed to do the job of being the leader and deputy leader of the largest opposition party. And so it just feels like maybe MIAP, missing in action politician.
After all of that alphabet soup, I think we will wrap it up there. Thank you both for your hot takes. As always, let's wrap up this episode with some recommendations, something you watched, read, or listened to this week. Tim, let's go to you first.
Mine's a podcast. It's the Working Group podcast, their episode featuring the debate over treaty principles with David Seymour and Helmut Modlik. And I'm trying not to only have recommended it because of the title they or someone in social media gave it, which was Iwi versus Peewee.
That's fantastic. Such a good title. As we know, a headline will draw people in. We love to hear it. Mark, what is yours for us this week?
Mine is your big scoop on Christopher Luxon's email font choice, which is blue Comic Sans. It's actually a story about the speech the draft speech that he ended up revising for his appearance at Koronehana earlier this year. But yes, there's a screenshot of a personal email from Christopher Luxon, and it is, as has been previously reported, blue and Comic Sans.
Yeah, it's a little bit disheartening. I tweeted this out today. I tweet out stories that I've spent weeks and weeks researching, crafting, kind of just go off into the abyss. This one, point out that our Prime Minister writes his emails in blue Comic Sans and it absolutely blows up. But there you go, that's Twitter for you. My recommendation for this week is one from Stuff's Bridie Whitten. It looks at the lack of open and transparent process around the government's $24 million of funding that was given to Mike King's mental health charities. It is well worth a read. That is it for our special election anniversary episode of Raw Politics. Thank you so much to our producer, Trent Doyle, and to all of our readers, listeners, and viewers. If you have any burning thoughts, feel free to send them my way. My email is laura.walters@newsroom.co.nz. You can find us here next week on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.